What do we now know that a cell is? If it's not a lump of jello, what would you compare it to?
It's a nanofactory.
If Darwin thought a cell was, say, a mud hut, what do we now know that a cell is?
I would say it would be more complicated than a Saturn V.
So what is in a cell as far as we know now?
A world that Darwin never could have imagined.
The cell may be the most dynamic. It is one mass of activity going on, bringing information out from across the cell, opening doors, closing doors, motor molecules moving along tracks. It is probably one of the most dynamic physical systems in the universe.
This is the story of a small planet in space called Earth.
For a typical Darwinian explanation of how life originated, Dr. Wells directed me toward this documentary.
The chemical elements essential for life, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen, were now in place. What was needed was a way of combining them. Perhaps the energy came from lightning. Whatever it was.
Excuse me?
Whatever it was, energy managed to arrange these chemical ingredients in just the right way.
Whatever it was? I was hoping for something a little more scientific. The most popular idea has been that life emerged spontaneously from primordial soup. In 1953, Stanley Miller mixed water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen to simulate the early Earth's atmosphere. Then he ran electricity through it in an attempt to jumpstart life.
It's alive! It's alive!
It didn't work. While the initial results seemed promising, 50 years later, most serious scientists have abandoned this approach in favor of alternate theories. Prominent Darwinist Michael Roos attempted to explain one of them to me. He wasn't kidding. How did we get from an inorganic world to the world of the cell?
Well, one popular theory is that it might have started off on the backs of crystals.
My crystal ball.
Molecules piggybacked on the back of crystals forming, and that this led to more and more complex. But of course, the nice thing about crystals is every now and then you get mistakes, mutations, and that this opens the way for natural selection.
But at one point there was not a living thing,
yeah,
and then there was a living thing. How did that happen?
Well, this is I've just told you. And I don't see any reason why you shouldn't go from very simple to more and more complex to more and more complex.
I don't either, but I don't know how you get from mud to a living cell. That's my question.
Yes, well, I've told you.
I think it was on the back of crystals. On the backs of crystals.
On the backs of crystals is at least one hypothesis, yes.
So that's your theory, and you think that is more likely and less far-fetched than intelligent design?
I think it is.
Natural selection does not provide any new genetic information. And for evolution,
there has to be new genetic information.
We need new genetic information.
And where does the new genetic information going to come from?
Well, that's the big question. Darwin assumed that the increase in information comes from natural selection. But natural selection reduces genetic information, and we know this from all the genetic population studies that we have. Generally, we are afraid of mutations. We don't want to have too many X-rays, we don't want to have Chernobyl, we don't want to have mutagenic substances like asbestos around us, whatever. Right. So we are avoiding mutations because we know that mutations spoil. We do not know of any mutation which is positive.
So you're saying that the idea that there could be random mutations caused by ultraviolet lights or radiation or some extreme of temperature that would create a new species is simply unknown.
Well, that has never been observed.
It has never
We
been
have
observed.
never observed a change, a genetic change by mutation, which produced something new and positive.
So, but if that's true, then Darwinism collapses.
Exactly.
When we look at any kind of system that we've made that has some of these properties, then we say, well, we're just going to throw in a random variation. What happens to the system? You try that on a computer.
What does
You just
happen?
take your program, you take Windows and say, well, I'm going to press a smudged finger here, there, and everywhere, change the program a little bit. It should because the thing just collapses. It just doesn't function. There has to be a very powerful...
Oh, this is very good. So that, for example, if you analogize a computer program to the DNA inside a cell, you can't just change it, it would just stop working.
It not only stops working, it crashes immediately. Unless you put tons of specially designed protection into the system that can handle random changes. But if you do that, and the cell has that kind of stuff, then the whole idea that the driving force of evolution is a random change, that loses a lot of its plausibility.
What were the chances of life arising on its own?
It's been speculated that probably there would have to be a minimum of about 250 proteins to provide minimal life function. If that's really true, then I think it's almost inconceivable that life could have happened in some simple step-by-step way.
Okay, so the simplest form of life requires at least 250 proteins to function. What's so difficult about that?
Welcome to the Casino of Life. Who wants to spin for a chance to win?
Oh, sure. I'll give it a shot. What do I win?
Take a look at this.
Huh? How about the world's first single-cell organism? This perfectly aligned string of proteins could be yours.
Now, take a spin.
I won.
Tina, tell him how many times he needs to do that to win the prize.
250.
That's right, folks, and all in the correct order.
But that's impossible.
We've heard that before, haven't we, Richard?
Come on, Mother Nature, do your thing. You stupid machine! I hate you!
We're talking about something that's staggeringly improbable, roughly 1 in a trillion.
Let all of life choose a million, a trillion. The number is essentially zero. Something has to skew nature to choose the ones that work.
So, in the game of life, it looks as if the house always wins. Luckily, some serious scientific minds have figured out a way to beat the odds.
Directed panspermia.
When faced with the overwhelming problem of the origin of life, Nobel Prize winner Francis Crick proposed this theory, that life was seeded on Earth, which basically means aliens did it. Crystals? Aliens? I thought we were talking about science, not science fiction.